and welcome to another episode of the Future of HR by Jobilon. Today we are here with Chase Warrington, head of remote at Doist, to talk about and walk us through the biggest challenges that come with working remotely and how to tackle each of them. Sophia, the host of this session, couldn't join unfortunately as her flight was cancelled and she asked me to jump in. My name is Sebastian, head of marketing at Jobilon, and it is an amazing pleasure to talk with you, Chase, about this topic. Before we start, Chase and me would love for everyone who's tuning in today to introduce yourself in the comments chat section. If you, during the conversation, want to share your thoughts of any questions, feedbacks for today's guest or about this topic, feel free to reach out and we'll make sure to answer them throughout the conversation. To start, I would love you to give us a bit of an introduction about yourself, Chase. Tell us a bit about what you do and what Doist does. And as you are one of the first ones ever I've met having a title as head of remote, what
A little bit
walk us
unique.
through what a typical day looks like and what a head of remote actually does.
Yeah, sure. Well, thank you for having me, Sebastian, and great to meet you. Yeah, so my name's Chase Warrington. I'm the head of remote at Doist, which is a new and unique sort of title that I'll describe in a second. I work at Doist. We're a company of about 100 people in 35 different countries, and the team spans all time zones. So we're very, very distributed in that way. We've been working this way for almost 15 years now. So long before the pandemic, we were embracing the fully remote mindset, and we're very passionate about sharing in public, building in public, kind of exploring what we're learning, being a fully remote team. And so that's a lot of the reason that my role exists. We're also a software company that builds products specifically for remote teams. So it helps us if we can help move the future of work conversation forward. But also, we're just really excited about sharing what we learn along the way. So our products are Todoist and Twist. Todoist is a task management soft or a lightweight project management tool, and another one is Twist, which is like a Slack competitor, built specifically for remote teams. We actually built it for ourselves because we wanted something more asynchronous that served our needs. So that's what we focus on in terms of the company. And my role specifically is all about promoting the future of work, helping showcase what we're doing internally with the outside world, and then also looking externally, looking at what other companies are doing, learning from others that are embracing this way of working, and disseminating that internally so that we can make sure we're doing remote at a very high level. So overall, it's my job to make sure that we're doing that we're doing remote at the highest possible level. And I have a lot of fun doing it. I love it.
Cool. Let's make sure we check out your tools and platforms for remote work. Let's dive into the discussion though. Remote work has fundamentally shaped the new world work and continues to do so. And as a matter of fact, in the latest research report from Future Forum, which has really high credibility, it turned out that 80% of knowledge workers want the flexibility in where they work, and as many as 94% in terms of when they work. So, how do we best address and meet these new employee expectations? And how do we design and build a remote team culture to make remote work in the long run? So, first and foremost, I would love to hear your perspective on where do you believe that companies are struggling the most when it comes to remote work? I'm thinking of technically structure, behaviors, preparations, maybe policies, and so on.
What we see a lot is that people experienced a pretty poor version of what remote can be. I mentioned that Doist has been working this way for 15 years, and we're not alone in that. It was certainly much more unique, 10 years ago, 5 years ago, even. But where we weren't the only ones doing that. There are other companies out there, and so the difference that a lot of us have to separate here is like what we've been doing for a long time. We've had a lot of time to fine tune the way that we approach work, and working distributedly, just in a distributed environment, is quite different from working in an office. So we have to set that expectation to the side and look at what a lot of people experienced during the pandemic, when there was this knee-jerk reaction to, hey, we got to figure out how to make remote work right now. We don't have the systems in place, we don't have the expertise, we don't have the tool sets. We're just going to replicate everything we're doing in the office on Zoom, and that'll probably work, right? And so this is the experience many people got, and unfortunately, there's still a lot of companies that are operating in that mentality. They're not really putting the effort into creating the infrastructure that's set up to be specifically curated for remote teams. And so that's what we're hoping to see more companies doing. And you're seeing people kind of shift out of this mentality of, let's just figure this out for right now, to, hey, this actually works really well. We can operate as a team in a highly functioning way. We can serve the needs of our team, who really want what you said, 80% want this flexibility, right? So we can give them that. We can also produce at a high level, but we're realizing we have to be very intentional about creating the systems and the best practices that foster that success. So that's the key, right? Is just like taking that from, let's just figure this out, to let's be really intentional and create a system that works in an incredible way for us, is now that we're a distributed team.
Interesting. And what is your take on company policies to make that really happen and make it really work? Have you seen any experience from what works and what works not?
Yeah, I think one of the keys is adopting a more asynchronous approach to work. So there's a very, painting a very broad stroke here, converting a lot of the conversations that used to happen synchronously in a in-office setting, the proverbial, like, hey, do you have 5 minutes? Can I stop by your office real quick? Hey, let's all go hop in a conference room and hammer this out. Moving all of those to a more asynchronous format sounds kind of easy on the surface, but it actually takes some effort and retooling and changing of the culture. So I think that's one of the things that can really serve the needs of companies trying to do this. I also think, going back to what I said a minute ago, really pressure testing every single aspect of the company, all the interactions that you have, the way you approach everything, like literally go through a detailed checklist and say, how do we do this? And was this built for the previous way we were working in an office, or is this built for the way that we're working now in a more distributed environment? And if the answer is not the latter, then you have to change that. You have to rethink it. And that's where, again, like coming back to intentionality is so key, is honing in on, okay, does this fit for the new way that we're working? Is it the best way to get the results that we're going for? So those are a couple things. I also think just embracing the nonlinear workday. Like, we have this idea that we're supposed to work from 9 to 5, but if we're going to give people flexibility over where they work, it makes even more sense to give them flexibility over when they work. Not just because you want to give them flexibility, but and all the great things that gives to them, but it also can serve the needs of the company. Giving people flexibility is going to open up a Pandora's box of opportunities in terms of people being able to craft their own workday, work when it's best for them, their energy levels. They're going to be happier, more engaged, because they have more time to focus on the things that matter to them outside of work. So I think if you can build the infrastructure that supports those two things, you can set your team up for a lot of success.
That's right. We've been talking about what you should have been doing or should do, but what's your take on what the most common misconceptions are about distributed work?
One of them is that you can't build culture. So people love to say, like, this is great, but you're just going to be sitting at home, lonely in your bedroom, and it's very isolating, and you'll never have any, camaraderie with your team. There's like some famous Malcolm Gladwell comments out there now about how you're not a part of something if you're working remote. Going back to what I said earlier, I think that can be the case. Like, if your company doesn't put any effort into creating that, then that might be your experience. That was the experience a lot of people got during the pandemic, but it's not what it can be. And that's the key differentiator. To just say that that's what remote work is is unfortunately a huge myth that a lot of people buy into. Doist, for instance, we were just awarded this pretty amazing award for having the most vibrant remote work culture at Running Remote's Flexible Workplace Awards. We put a lot of effort into this. I mean, it's probably my top focus is how we create culture and connection, considering that we're 100 people in 35 different countries. That means every third person's in a different country, and we're still building a vibrant culture. So it can actually be done. And I think we like to think that we've built a strong culture because of our diversity, not just in spite of it. And so I think that's one of the key myths that needs to be overcome, is that you can't actually build really tight connections. It requires some synchronous time, virtual get-togethers. It requires bringing people together in real life as well. It's one of the other things that I lead for us at Doist is bringing people together a couple times a year for in-person events. But we don't need to be together 52 weeks out of the year. We can be together a couple weeks out of the year and leave the rest of the time to live and work where and when we want. But still build those tight bonds that last throughout the year. So that's a myth I love to debunk.
That's right. And you mentioned already building a culture, but in terms of like building a remote team culture, at what point, or where do we start? Where does it end? And what are the most important aspects to have in mind when building our geographically independent culture, though?
So I think the first one, at least for us, I'll just speak from our perspective, because I talk to a lot of people who are in similar roles to me at other companies, and we share, stories about what works for us and what doesn't. And it's always interesting because we're all approaching this in slightly different ways. But I think one of the things that really shines through as a common red thread is that we all realize and recognize that, we're a team first. We're not a family. We subscribe to that mentality, right? So we're going to first bond around the work, and the work is what actually unites us, and that's perfectly fine to admit. So culture for us isn't, Zoom happy hours and icebreaker games and things like that. Culture for us is like building awesome products, building things that we're really excited about, creating infrastructure that allows people to cross collaborate with people from different teams all around the world. They're working predominantly asynchronously, but some synchronously, and they're building really cool things. And then every cycle, which is a month for us, every 4 weeks, we're switching that up, and you're getting to work with new people in a new sprint. And so that brings a lot of culture and connection, and putting a lot of emphasis on that during our hiring and onboarding process is also really important. So we're building that cohesion around the work. But then there's this other big slice of the pie that we need to fill in, and that's the human connection, the outside of work stuff. A lot of people like to reference the water cooler in the office. Oh, well, what about the water cooler where we used to just hang out and chit chat, and great ideas would come from there. I always kind of think that's a little bit of BS, but anyway, we still want to create those serendipitous conversations. We want to create those spaces where people can connect. So we built out a huge, or not a huge list, but a long list, I feel like, of places where people can connect synchronously, asynchronously. We have spaces where people can chat about stuff outside of work. We have activities that initiate this weekly, monthly, at regular cadences. We have virtual events that we hold, from cooking classes to workouts to mastermind sessions. We do like TED Talk style conversations where people are presenting something that they're really passionate about, and we get involved in that. So there's all kinds of things we can do. And then I mentioned, like, we actually bring people together, which is a huge part of this. Like, having a strong in real life IRL strategy is super important for any long-term sustainable mindset towards remote work. So we put a lot of investment in that as well. So all these little pieces of the pie kind of build out what we see as culture. And I think the main one is how we work together. And so we put a ton of emphasis on that.
Would you then say, as requires some thoughts, that companies at a certain level would require a dedicated role like you to make things happen? Or is there any point where HR teams could start looking at these concepts and bringing them through to success, even for smaller businesses?
Yeah, I don't think like my role is a need early on. I think having the mentality and the mindset and the conviction, I guess maybe is the right word, in like in building a strong remote culture and a strong remote team. I think that needs to be adopted from the top down very early on. And then there's a point, I mean, we're about 100 people and we're one of the smaller teams to have someone in my role as far as I know. There's some others a little bit smaller, but I mean generally I think you need to reach an inflection point where like it's it's a bit too much for one team to handle and do really well. If it's your aspiration to do remote at a very high level, if you just want to do it because it's just the way you want to facilitate work, then perhaps you don't need someone very much dedicated to this. But I think there is a lot to be said for what your aspirations are as a team. At Doist, remote is baked into the DNA of the company. It's who we are. It's what we've always been. It's baked into our products. So for us, it's very important to be, our mission as a company is to build the future of work. So if we don't have somebody leading that internally, then how are we possibly going to do that? And so with such a strong mission, yeah, we feel it's important. But I've talked to people at other companies who, they have several hundred people or 1,000 people, and they're just now putting somebody in this place, in this position. So there's an excellent white paper out there, written by remote.com and Laurel Farr from Distribute Consulting, which is called the Head of Remote White Paper or something like that. And it does a fantastic job outlining when you might want to hire somebody like this, and put them in this role. So I would definitely reference that. It's a great white paper.
Yeah, awesome. We're gonna share that then after this session here. And there are other many books out there, with practical tips. But what are you tips on like working or collaborate effectively virtually? It's like, what is like what you do, what you could recommend right away, tips, tricks, anything that would make it easier to start with, or things to avoid maybe.
Yeah. Um, so a couple things, like some core values around remote, maybe we can call them, are like trust, transparency, autonomy, and mindfulness. So just kind of going quickly through those, like they all kind of connect to asynchronous communication as a whole. So we focus almost 95% of our communication is done asynchronously at Doist, meaning everything's in the written form. We don't expect people to respond immediately. We don't hold a lot of meetings. I actually just ran a survey internally. 95% of our team is doing less than 5 hours per week of meetings, and 60% is doing less than 2 hours per week of meetings. So just to put it in perspective, my CEO has like 1 to 2, maybe 3 hours of meetings per week. So we're very, very light on meetings. We don't think if you're meeting, you're not necessarily working, you're just present in a meeting. And so we de-emphasize presenteeism completely. Like just being present doesn't equate to doing anything necessarily. And so we put all the emphasis on the outputs. What are you producing? What are the goals? Are we hitting those goals? And if so, I don't really care how present you are at work. We don't need you to respond immediately. We don't need you on meetings at 10 p.m. your time or 5 a.m. your time. It just doesn't work for a very distributed team. So moving everything as much as possible to an async mindset is super helpful. And then within that, focusing on stuff like trust. Like we trust our team is working. We're not putting a bunch of energy into some surveillance state of monitoring when they're working or mouse clicks or anything like that. I trust that they're going to get back to me within 24 hours. I trust that when somebody says they're going to do something, when we put a lot of emphasis on accountability. So if you say you're going to do something, if the task is assigned to you at a certain date, you're either going to tell me you can't hit that date or you're going to accomplish it by that date. So trust is really important. Transparency, keeping everything in a very transparent place. Like we use Twist, our own tool. We're dog fooding, eating our own dog food. So we keep everything in Twist. It's transparent. Everybody can peer in and comment and collaborate when they need to, when it's a good time for them, but they're not forced to be on at any one time to do so. Using other tools that promote transparency as a sort of baseline is key.
Mhm.
Um, Sorry, yeah, and then, mindfulness, like, we're very mindful about how we communicate with each other. We cut down on as many notifications as possible. Think that, like, every notification that you send to somebody is potentially derailing them for 20 to 30 minutes. Like, every time you drag someone out of their deep work mode, which is where we want people to be, we want our team to be focused on deep work much more than, like, just chit-chatting, just being present, just being available. We want people really focused on their deep work. So every time I send someone a notification, I could be pulling them out of their deep work state, and it takes about 20 to 30 minutes to recalibrate for the average person. So we're very mindful about, do I need to send this notification right now? Do I need to tag this person, or could I just tag this other person? Do I need to tag a whole team, or is it just one person? So we cut down on notifications quite a bit, and that really helps us, keep everybody focused and rowing in the same direction. So I think I listed 4 and I mentioned 3 there.
Yeah.
Did I miss one?
I think you're good, but we have a really exciting questions from Linda going to show it now. She asks us, what are your thoughts on how to create a good setup when parts of the stuff are remote and some are work in the office? Any tips on that?
Yeah, Linda, it's an awesome question because the truth is, like, we're still weird at Doist being completely remote. Like, I think 75 to 80% of companies now in 2023 will identify as hybrid, this setup that you're talking about. And only like 5 to 10% will identify as remote first, which we are. So we don't have this challenge, but the companies that I talk to that do, which make up the majority of companies in the world now, they're the ones that are really successful at it adopt what we call like remote first principles. So they're operating as a remote first team. So look at the remote first teams that are adopting remote in full, and use those same basic principles to give everyone the same equitable experience, both in the office and X of the office, working from home or wherever. The general idea, like the rule that you could keep in mind, is we want to create a location agnostic experience. So regardless of where you're working from, you're trying to get the exact same experience. If you're in an office, if you're working from home or a cafe or whatever. So there's a lot of little idiosyncrasies within that. The kind of like baseline core, like easy example would be, when you're in a meeting, everybody has their laptop, whether you're or their own camera, whether you're in the conference room or at home, right? So everybody looks like they're in the same setup, as opposed to like one major camera showing everybody in the conference room, and then everybody else at home is feeling left out. That's the easy one to go to, but there's a lot of layers there. But yeah, I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, remember that if we at Jobylon have this kind of setup, some people are home, some are at work, they actually put on all the laptops and have the cameras on. And it doesn't matter if some of the people are in one single room, they all turn the laptops on so everybody can be viewed, be seen, and talked to when it's time.
Yeah.
Last question before we have to wrap up, unfortunately, already. Do you think flexible work arrangements is something every company should consider? And where do you see the benefits? Easy question.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's tough to say every, just because I'm sure there's edge cases, and there's industries where these principles that we're talking about, or these roles there's industries, roles, projects, organizations where they're on the periphery of what we're talking about here. But generally speaking, people that are in positions like ours, knowledge workers, there's a very high percentage of roles now that can be done remotely, and the statistics you read earlier speak for themselves, right? 80% of people want this. I've seen statistics that show that number in the 90s, and I don't think we're moving in a direction where the future says that number will go lower. If anything, I think that's just going to continue to creep up. So the companies that are pushing back on this just need to ask themselves, like, are they building for now, today's reality? And if so, are you already in kind of trouble with potentially, attracting, retaining, and keeping talent? Or are you building for the future where that number is going to, continue to creep up into the 90s and higher? So I think you have to start building for the future. You have to think the future is more flexible, and so it would behoove you as a company, and it would help your employees a lot if you would embrace this instead of fighting it. All the energy, the effort that you're putting into figuring out how to bring people back to the office, maybe consider investing that in giving them what they want, and see what you get from that.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of research on if you're looking for new talents, how actually could the lack in talent shortage, if you believe there is some, if remote work could help on that actually, or if it actually really makes a business more profitable because people are more effective, or it helps you with employee retention. So it's a lot of benefits I've seen. There is a good question from, I know Joe. I'm going to show it here. Do you meet and video calls for ideation and collaboration, design sprints, I guess, where you usually have post-its and stuff? She loves deep work, but would be great to hear how you approach ideation.
Yeah, this is I totally agree. This is one of those things that has a significant trade-off with the remote async approach, and there's two sides to this. So the short answer to the question is we do a good bit of it async, but we do some of it in live sync sessions. That I mentioned, like the 2 to 5 hours per week that our team's spending. A lot of that time would be that time 2 to 5 hours that we're spending per week in meetings. A lot of that time would be spent on something like this. There's something to be said about that energy, those aha moments that come from putting people in the same room, together. So yeah, there's a lot of value in that. What I think though might get overblown a little bit is that like that's the only way to ideate or the only way to collaborate, because there's a lot of power in embracing asynchronous brainstorming as well, and we've done a good job with that using tools like Mural and Miro and others that can kind of help you visualize what you're trying to build, and letting people think through that process over a given period of time. So rather than confining that brainstorming session to a half day or a 2 hour meeting or something, we can spread that out over a few days and give people a lot of time to process things. We also find that like our introverted teammates really thrive in this environment that I'm describing, not the synchronous environment. And a lot of our more creative people fall into that category. So in the end, we get a really great result either way. And I think a mix of the two is the best case scenario.
That's a really good point, including everybody of the team.
Yeah.
I mean, and another aspect is that we at Jobilon think is really important as happiness. I mean, we at Jobilon are having a remote happiness culture. Basically,
Mhm.
it's based totally on happiness. If it makes you as an employee happier, where when you can work from home, or it makes you more creative or productive if you work from another place or async, whatever, then why should we stop you making making you happier? So it didn't make
Yeah.
sense, and we haven't seen that as a there was no perfect policy for us as a company. We haven't based it on any like real research evidence on what remote work actually brings to the table and its impacts to the business. But
Mhm.
this is why Jobilon has gathered all the major research that is, and is going to dedicate the next couple of weeks on this topic, remote happiness. We are going to release a research report soon with videos, inspiration, tips, and further resources. So make sure you check out our channels. Chase, is there anything else you would like to give people on the way towards the weekend, or like kick off next week and with new energy on this topic?
No, I mean, thank you for asking some awesome questions from you and from the audience. It was really insightful and good to think through some of these things for myself as well. I'll just leave people with a couple places where if they want to dive a little bit deeper on anything that I touched on here, we've got a couple really good articles. First of all, we have a blog that talks a lot about remote work, remote teamwork, from 15 years of learnings. So there's a lot to dive into there. It's blog.doist.com. And specifically, there's a fairly recent article that I wrote about how we create culture at Doist across, multiple time zones. So it lists out all the specific activities that we're doing at Doist to kind of foster more human connection. So that could be helpful. We also have a really great async newsletter that's available now. You can find it by Googling Twist async newsletter, and there's some incredible conversations happening in real time with async experts all around the world. Thousands and thousands of people that are really passionate about making async work. So I'll leave you guys with those. Follow me on LinkedIn if you want to connect and talk more about any of this. Always happy to. Chase Warrington on LinkedIn.
Yeah, that's awesome. I guess we're gonna make a follow-up email on this chat to everyone that is being following Jobilon and us the email. So follow us and Chase if you haven't done so yet, and stay tuned for upcoming sessions. Thank you so much, Chase. Thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you for all the comments. Thank you so much. See you soon and have a great weekend. Bye.
Thank you,
Cheers.
Sebastian.